Faith is definitely one of my favorite stats in this game. Capable of providing damage, mitigation, and health recovery, I really think that it is one of the best attributes that we have access to. It fits my playstyle perfectly. In Elden Ring, I have found that there are a few weapons that make Faith have very good synergy with Dexterity. This hybrid build combines an incredible amount of damage with the support of incantations and the capability of recovering up to 1/4 of your HP on each and every kill. This build is savage because it believes in taking everything and giving nothing back. This is Taker's Acolyte, and with it, you will consume, devour, and destroy. As always, we will review the stats of this build, the equipment that we use, and of course its applications within the game. Since there is a lot of ground to cover, I have created timestamps in the description of this video in order to make it easier to navigate the content and give you the opportunity to skip straight to the part that interests you the most. Let's get started. This is a PvE focused build that works well both solo and in jolly cooperation. It combines the abilities of Dexterity and Faith in order to create a character with a very high damage output, but that can also regenerate its own health through enemy kills. It is a bona fide engine of life-sucking destruction. The more damage you do, the more you heal. At the same time, this lets you save your resources for when they matter. There is no need for Crimson Flasks when you got enemies to drain. On top of this, the build has plenty of versatility, letting you choose whether you want to be more of a tank or more of a cannon. Both equipment and incantations let you mold the build to your own preferences and your own needs. Power and choice are in your grasp. To reach this objective, we will be running the following stats. Start the game as a Vagabond. This class is the most efficient to reach the required stat block for this build, allowing us to make use of every rune level possible to its maximum potential. As the primary focus of this build is PvE, I have chosen to base it on rune level 150. Finally, this is the stats block that you want to end up with. 60 Vigor, but please note that it is actually 59 Vigor plus 1 from the Crimson Hood. 26 Mind, 13 Endurance, 15 Strength, 50 Dexterity, 9 Intelligence, 50 Faith, and 7 Arcane. There are many ways to reach these stats. Level up however you feel comfortable. That said, I do recommend that you take the following path. As soon as you are in the lands between, the first thing to do is get your Vigor to 20. Survivability is more important than damage when you are just starting out a character. The second priority is to get some basic support for the character. This means Endurance to 13, Strength to 15, and Faith to 12. You will get access to a bit more armor, some basic support incantations, and a bit more strength for weapon requirements. Your third priority is to get Dexterity to 30. Combining this with 15 Strength, you will be able to use many weapons to get you through the game, as well as get some good scaling for them. I recommend the Longsword, the Halberd, Bloodhound's Fang, or the Uchigatana as some good early game weapons. Any of these will carry you through much of the game. Now, it's time to bulk up, and your fourth priority is Vigor to 40. This will allow you to survive comfortably through the mid-game, allowing you to focus on your other stats. The fifth priority is to get Faith to 30. You will now have access to the best support type incantations, and they will cover any possible weaknesses of the build. Furthermore, you now have the stats needed to wield our weapon of choice, the Blasphemous Blade. We get to enjoy this weapon from Mount Gelmir all the way to the endgame. The sixth priority is to top off Vigor at 59. This will put you at our required HP pool, granting you maximum security and of course maximum healing. We only go to 59 because we will use the Crimson Hood in our armor setup, which gives us an additional point of Vigor to reach the required 60. Next up, we focus on utility, and we bring our mind all the way up to 26. With access to top tier incantations and the Blasphemous Blade, more mind means more FP, and more FP means more carnage. For your 8th priority, bring Faith to 50. This not only increases the AR of the Blasphemous Blade, but it also heavily increases the damage of its Ash of War, Taker's Flame. And finally, the ninth and last priority is to finish Dexterity at 50. This will round out your damage scaling, offering additional power to both the Blasphemous Blade and all of our secondary backup weapons. So, why do we want these final stats? Allow me to explain. Vigor at 60 because I believe it is the perfect amount of health to survive the hardest hitting attacks of PvE. This will give us a total of 1900 base HP. It is the second cap for the stat. Going any higher really diminishes your returns, and honestly, I would never go any lower. Remember that in this build I used the Crimson Hood, so our Vigor is 59 plus 1 from the armor piece. Mind at 26 because this build runs heavy incantation support and many power Ashes of War. I wanted to get this as high as possible after min-maxing every other stat in the build. Endurance at 13 because it is exactly the amount that I need to be able to use the weapons and armor for the build while maintaining a medium load. This has been perfectly min-maxed to the last decimal. Any lower and you lose the build, any higher and you're wasting points. Strength at 15 because it is the minimum that I need in order to meet the requirements for all of the weapons that this build uses. Dexterity at 50 because it is needed for weapon requirements, but also it is one of the primary stats of this build and it adds a lot of damage through weapon scaling. Intelligence at 9 because it is the base level of the Vagabond. We do not increase it at all in this build. Faith at 50 because it is the other primary stat of the build. It provides us with many support incantations. It increases the damage of our weapons through scaling, and it heavily increases the damage of our main Ashes of War. Finally, Arcane at 7 because it is the base level of the Vagabond. We do not increase it at all in this build. Moving on to the equipment, this is the basic layout of the build. In our main hand, we will be running the Blasphemous Blade and the Tree Seal. The Blasphemous Blade will be the main weapon of this build. It fits the theme perfectly and it brings the power that we need. This weapon is a quality faith weapon, meaning that it has good scaling with 3 stats: Strength, Dexterity, and Faith. As you have seen, I have decided to focus on Dexterity and Faith for this build, and these stats get us over 800 AR on the weapon. This AR is split damage between physical and fire, which theoretically lowers the weapon's utility, but in practice, we can make adjustments to turn this into an actual advantage. The main point of this build is to regenerate health, and this weapon is one of the main tools for this job. The Blasphemous Blade heals some of our HP after every single kill. Furthermore, the Ash of War, Taker's Flame, is a magnificent tool for both offense and defense. This Ash of War deals a massive amount of damage to our enemies, and it also knocks them down to the ground, which gives us time and space to move in and deal further damage. Not only this, but this Ash of War also heals our HP per enemy that we hit. Finally, the Blasphemous Blade has the standard Greatsword moveset, giving us a versatile group of options for all enemies and terrains. And speaking of greatswords, this weapon is the one with the second longest reach. All in all, this is one of the best weapons for PvE, and a perfect fit for this build. As mentioned before, also in our main hand is the Tree Seal. I use this seal because it gives me the most incantation scaling out of all of the seals that I can use with these stats. That being said, the scaling is not really good enough in order to justify using offensive incantations. For this reason, I tend to stick with a full support incantation setup so that I can increase the damage that our weapons and Ashes of War do. Nevertheless, if you prefer to use some offensive incantations, the option is there. Also, this seal has no weight. At 0.0 units of weight, this seal allows me to use incantations without affecting my equip load. This saves us a few points of endurance. Before continuing, I want to make a mention to an alternative. Blasphemous Blade is a split damage weapon offering both physical and fire damage. So, the question is obvious. What happens when you fight an enemy that is resistant to fire damage? Well, for these situations, I like to keep the Sacred Relic Sword in my inventory. This is a great sword that offers physical and holy split damage. The best part about it is that this sword has very good scaling with both dexterity and faith, so we do not lose any damage when we switch. As a result, we get an option to take care of those enemies that resist fire damage without losing any damage output. Furthermore, its Ash of War, Wave of Gold, is fantastic for PvE. Offering a large area of effect and a strong damage output, Wave of Gold is the perfect tool for crowd control. As a final note, it is also important to know that the Sacred Relic Sword has the longest range of all Greatsword type weapons. It is top 1. For these reasons, I always keep this sword in my inventory, ready to hard swap to it when the situation calls for it. In the offhand, we need the Serpent God's Curved Sword. I like to use this curved sword with the Thunderbolt Ash of War and the Lightning Affinity. This provides the weapon with good dexterity scaling and the ability of dealing lightning type split damage. In this way, this build has access to fire, holy, and lightning damage weapons in order to take advantage of the different weaknesses of the enemies that we face. Also, Thunderbolt gives us a ranged option for those cases where Taker's Flame cannot reach. That being said, this weapon is usually not going to be used for damage. The biggest interest for this weapon comes with its passive ability. Much like the Blasphemous Blade, the Serpent God's Curved Sword also heals us every single time that we kill an enemy. Furthermore, the healing effect of both weapons stack together when we have them equipped, increasing the total amount of health that we recover on each kill. It is easy to see why this weapon is so good for this build. We do not need it for damage, it just needs to stay still at our waist. With the weapons out of the way, let's talk about Talismans. As mentioned before, in the objectives of this build, we want damage, we want HP, and we want high recovery. In order to reach these objectives, we will be using the following main setup: Erdtree Favor +2, Crimson Amber Medallion +2, Shard of Alexander, and Taker's Cameo. This setup gives us a total of 2,134 HP, an additional 15% damage on our Ashes of War, and an additional healing on each kill. Let me be clear, the Talisman Taker's Cameo stacks with the Blasphemous Blade and with the Serpent God's Curved Sword. Yes, all three of these tools stack together for massive amounts of healing per kill. This setup gives us everything that we need: high HP, high damage, and high recovery. With all of this said, I do want to offer you an alternative. This Talisman setup goes very hard on offense. As a result, this build might lack a bit of defense, offering only 20% base physical damage absorption. I understand that some players might prefer to have a bit more defense, so in those cases, I recommend that you switch the Shard of Alexander for the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. With this change, we lose the additional 15% damage on Ashes of War, but we gain a multiplicative 20% physical damage absorption. This brings us from 20% absorption all the way to 36 physical damage absorption. This option is much safer. As always, you will have to make the decision. Do you go for attack or do you go for defense? Alright, let's talk about armor. In this game, armor is extremely important. This is because this game has extremely good looking armor. Fashion Souls, or Elden Bling, however you prefer to call it, is at an all-time high. For this build, I use the Drake set as the base, because I like its color coordination. For this reason, I use the chest, legs, and arms of this set. The chest is the altered version. As for the head, I like to use the Crimson Hood. Not only does this piece give me an additional point of vigor, but it also fits the fashion very well. Overall, I like how it all fits together with the Blasphemous Blade. In any case, this armor setup provides 20% physical damage reduction on its own, and 36% physical damage reduction if you decide to use the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. As for poise, this fashion only provides 19 points of it, It is honestly not a lot. I definitely went for looks over stats with this setup. Next up, I want to go over the summons that can prove to be useful in this build. When playing this character, I actually like to switch between Black Knife Teach and the Mimic. Both of these are very good options with this setup because they provide different qualities that increase the power and versatility of the build. Starting with Teach, her domain is damage. Dancing in and out of range makes her extremely durable, and her special Rune of Death attack adds damage on top of damage. Let's not forget about the additional 10% HP reduction debuff that she puts on enemies. All of this creates a summon that is great in situations where you are fighting a single large enemy. This means bosses. Now, when it comes to the cons of Teach, it is hard to ignore her high FP cost. This build can afford it, but it is also a full FP bar. We are forced to use a Cerulean Flask immediately after summoning her. That being said, she is definitely a good summon that boosts the overall damage output of the build. On the other hand, we have the Mimic. This is the summon that you use when you need a tank, or when you need to deal with multiple weaker mobs. Now, if you're going to use the Mimic, it is important to understand one thing. With our current stats, we do not meet the requirements to use the Blasphemous Blade with one hand. We need to two-hand it. Unfortunately, the Mimic does not use weapons with two hands very frequently. This means that the damage that it will do with the Blasphemous Blade will be lower. In order to remedy this, you need to equip the Sacred Relic Sword, summon the Mimic, and then re-equip the Blasphemous Blade. The Sacred Relic Sword only has a 14 strength requirement, meaning the Mimic will have full damage with it no matter how many hands it uses. With this setup, you can get the support of the Mimic, launching large waves of gold all over the battlefield, dealing damage to everything while you finish the mobs off. It is a deadly combination. Up to this point, we have spoken about the equipment and the armor. We have talked about offense and defense. As such, there's only one last thing to cover: the incantations that we will use to increase our power. As mentioned before, this build does not have extremely high incantation scaling, so I find offensive incantations to be lacking strength. For this reason, I prefer to run this build with a full support incantation list. My damage comes from my weapons, and my defense from my faith. The only downside is that it is temporary. Learning to manage your incantations and buffs is extremely important. Learning how to use them, when to use them, and how long it takes to reapply them, and of course, which ones go together, is extremely important. At the end of the day, spell choice is completely personal, and this build allows you to use almost all incantations available in the game. If you're the type of player that would prefer to use some offensive incantations, do not hesitate to do so. At the end of the day, it's all personal taste. With that out of the way, let's take a look at my own list. In this build, we will be using all of our memory slots in order to prepare us for any situation that we may find. As such, the list of spells that we will be using is the following: Flame Cleanse Me, Black Flame's Protection, Barrier of Gold, Flame Protect Me, Golden Lightning Fortification, Lord's Divine Fortification, Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, Blessing's Boon, and Heal. First up, Flame Cleanse Me is one of the most powerful incantations in the game. It provides a fast, cheap way to get rid of poison and, most importantly, Scarlet Rot. This should be the first spell in your list. Always have it ready, because it will always make your life easier. Second, we have the Resistance Crew, the quintet of Black Flame's Protection, Barrier of Gold, Flame Protect Me, Golden Lightning Fortification, and Lord's Divine Fortification is our main tool to counterpick the damage that each of the game's enemies and bosses will do. They provide resistances to physical, magic, fire, lightning, and holy damage, respectively. You should always have one of these active if you want to increase your chances of survival. It is very important to know what you're up against so that you can help yourself and your allies survive the battle. Third, our damage bulkers. The combination of Golden Bow and Flame Grant Me Strength will provide us a huge boost of damage whenever it is required. As you know, Golden Bow also increases our defense, so it should be the buff that is always active because it is the most versatile. Fourth, the Healing Duo. Blessing's Boon provides us 8 HP per second regeneration. This is very good for co-op, and it will go very far in saving your resources. Now, if you're playing solo, Bestial Vitality is a good substitute, as it is an extremely efficient healing tool. Save your flasks for when they matter. Now, Heal is the second spell in this healing duo, but honestly, do not use it to heal yourself. It is not made for that purpose. In fact, I use this spell for one thing and one thing only: to kill Revenants. Revenants are one of the most powerful and annoying non-boss type enemies that you can find in the game. They deal incredible amounts of damage and are in constant motion and attack. They teleport around the area and, I am sure you know, have that one stupid move where they hit you 1,000,000 times with all of their limbs in succession. It is very difficult to fight them, but fortunately, if you do not let them get started on their offense, then they become much easier. In order to achieve this, we use Heal. Revenants are very weak to holy damage, but also they are extremely weak to healing spells. If you cast a healing spell with an AoE and it catches the Revenant, they will take damage instead of being healed. The amount of damage they take is always the same, about 60% of their total HP. 2 spells will always kill them, and since the first spell also staggers them, it is very easy to cast 2 of them back to back for the kill. Since the damage is always the same, I like to use Heal because it costs the least FP of all the AoE heals. If you execute this strategy correctly, then you will defeat the Revenant before it even has a chance to hit you. If you're like me and decide to run support incantations, one of the most important things to know is which buffs stack with each other and what should be the casting order. Let's go over this so you can understand which incantations you should cast and know how you should cast them. In regards to stacking buffs, I have done all the testing with the incantations that this build uses, and there are 2 setups for buffing our character. There is the offensive setup and the defensive setup. When it comes to offense, we can stack 3 buffs: Golden Bow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blessing's Boon. When it comes to defense, we can stack 3 buffs as well: Golden Bow, any of the damage negations, and Blessing's Boon. For example, if you want physical damage negation, you stack Golden Bow with the Black Flames protection with Blessing's Boon. Now, if you want magic damage protection, you stack Golden Bow with Barrier of Gold with Blessing's Boon, so on and so forth. That being said, it is important to cast these buffs in the right order so that we can maximize the uptime that we get from them. Please know that Blessing's Boon has a duration of 90 seconds. Golden Bow has a duration of 80 seconds. Flame Grant Me Strength has a duration of 30 seconds. Finally, all of the damage negation spells have the same duration, 70 seconds. This means that in order to maximize uptime in our buffs, you need to cast them in the following order. For the offensive setup, first is Blessing's Boon, second is Golden Bow, and third is Flame Grant Me Strength. For the defensive setup, first is Blessing's Boon, second is Golden Bow, and third is whichever damage negation spell that you need. As for the results of each setup, well, the offensive setup gets you about 38% more attack power, it leaves you with 28% physical damage reduction and 8 HP per second regeneration. This will last for about 70 to 80 seconds, depending on how efficient you are at casting. The defensive setup will give you about a 15% attack increase, 53% physical damage reduction if you go down that path, or 28% physical damage reduction plus about 70% non-physical damage reduction of the element that you choose. This, of course, also is added to the 8 HP per second regeneration from Blessing's Boon. This will last you for about 70 to 80 seconds depending on how efficient you are at casting. In this case, knowledge is very important, and if you know which damage type each boss deals, then you can counter it and take very little damage from its attacks. On the other hand, if you know that you're fighting a boss that gives you many chances to hit it, then going with the offensive setup is definitely the way. Adapt to your situation and come out victorious. One of the key characteristics of this build is the ability that we have to recover our HP. This build combines and stacks different types of equipment in order to get large amounts of HP back on each and every kill. Here, you will see all of the information regarding to the life drain. I understand that this may be a lot to take in, so let's go ahead and review it step by step. First, let's go over the basic life drain. The 3 basic tools that give this build life drain are the Blasphemous Blade, the Serpent God's Curved Sword, and the Taker's Cameo Talisman. The Blasphemous Blade will heal us for 40 HP, plus an additional 4% of our maximum HP on each kill. Then, the Serpent God's Curved Sword will heal us for 25 HP, plus an additional 2.5 of our max HP on each kill. And then, the Taker's Cameo Talisman will heal us for 30 HP, plus an additional 3% of our max HP for each kill. All of these tools stack together, and they give us a total of 95 HP, plus an additional 9.5% of our max HP as health recovery for each and every enemy that we kill. As you can see, this is the basic life drain that will always be active no matter what our situation is. So, if we are doing co-op or if we are playing solo without any great runes of the demigods, then the calculation for the life drain is the following: 2134 max HP multiplied by 0.095 plus 95. The total is 297 HP recovered for each enemy that we kill. Now, let's add the great runes of the demigods into the mix. The 2 best runes that synergize with this build are Morgoth's and Rykard's. Morgoth's Great Rune increases our maximum HP by 25%, and this means that the build with this rune will have a total of 2667 HP. In this case, the calculation of the life drain is the following: 2667 max HP multiplied by 0.095 plus 95. The total is 348 HP recovered per enemy that we kill. Finally, Rykard's Great Rune gives us an additional life drain condition that stacks with everything else that we already have. Specifically, this Great Rune heals us for 80 HP plus an additional 7 of our maximum HP for every enemy that we kill. If we stack it with everything else we already spoke about, our build will get a full total life drain of 175 HP plus an additional 16.5% of our max HP. And this happens with each and every kill. So with this great rune, the calculation will be as follows: 2134 maximum HP multiplied by 0.165 plus 175. The result is that we would get a grand total of 527 HP recovery for each and every single enemy that we kill. That is almost 25% of our HP. If we kill 4 enemies, we go from 0 to full health. That is incredible. My dear viewer, I am sure that you're asking, which rune is better to use? Well, the answer to that depends on what you're looking for. With Morgoth's rune, you get less HP per kill, but remember that you have a lot more maximum HP. This increases your survivability by a lot. On the other hand, with Rykard's rune, you do lose the extra HP, but you get a lot more upkeep with the extra life drain. They are both good choices, and you would have to make your decision based on what you prefer. Personally, I prefer Rykard's Rune. Why? Well, to be honest, I made this build to reach the maximum amount of health recovery, and that's the way to do it, with Rykard's Rune. Let me put this into perspective. A fully upgraded plus 12 Crimson Flask heals us for a total of 810 HP. So, if we get a total of 527 HP recovery per kill, then that means that every time we kill an enemy, we heal for 65% of a full flask. That is tremendous value and a fantastic way to save your flasks, to save your resources for when they matter. As you can see, the life drain that this build can get is extremely good. That being said, its greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. When you are exploring the lands between, or you're going through a dungeon, there are a lot of enemies, so you are able to keep the heals coming. As long as there are things to kill, there is healing. Unfortunately, this is useless when we are fighting most bosses. Normally, there is only one enemy in the boss fight, which is the boss itself. Since we are not killing anything except the boss, all of these resources that we spend to get life drain are completely wasted. I don't think this is a deal breaker for the build because we are capable of making adjustments, but it is important to keep this in mind. HP recovery on each enemy killed is useless when facing bosses. There's only one last thing that I want to cover about this build. Thanks to the versatility of our main weapon, the Blasphemous Blade, it is very much possible to run this exact same build as a Strength Faith hybrid instead of a Dex Faith hybrid. All it will take is a few simple changes. Here is all of the information about how to do it. In regards to the stats, we need to take a few points out of mind and put them into Endurance. Also, we have to change the focus from Dexterity to Strength, so we lower Dexterity from 50 to 15, and we increase Strength from 15 to 50. The rest of the stats remain the same. When it comes to the equipment, we keep using the same main weapon, the Blasphemous Blade. Our secondary weapon will continue to be the Serpent God's Curved Sword, but we will be changing its affinity. We will go from Lightning affinity with Dex scaling to the Heavy affinity with Strength scaling. Now, when it comes to the possible alternative weapons, for those situations where we need a different damage type, there are plenty of good choices for a Strength Faith variant. Ordovis's Greatsword, Golden Halberd, the Gargoyle weapons, and more. There are plenty of options to get some holy damage Strength Faith weapons. As for the Incantation Seal, a Strength Faith variant can take advantage of the Clawmark Seal, which gets better scaling, which means that you can also get a boost to your beast incantations. As a result, this build can use that type of incantations in order to get some good offensive spell damage for cheap FP costs. When we compare the Strength Faith version with the Dexterity Faith version, they are honestly very similar. Strength Faith does more weapon damage, about 5% more AR, thanks to the strength bonuses to using weapons with two hands. That said, when it comes to Ashes of War, I have found that, in my opinion, Dex Faith weapons have more useful ones, both in damage and versatility. I am not saying that Strength Faith Ashes of War are bad, I just prefer the Dex Faith ones, particularly Wave of Gold. That is extremely good for PvE. In regards to incantations, the Strength Faith version of this build can take full advantage of Support Incantation and even get some good damage out of the Beast Incantations. As a result, it is more useful than the Dex Faith version. Finally, it is important to note that the Dex Faith version of the build has a slight increase in the incantation casting speed, thanks to the extra points in Dexterity. It is honestly not a lot, but it definitely is there. All in all, and like I mentioned, both build types, Strength Faith and Dex Faith, are very similar and their power level is equal. You can run both types and the only difference would be the equipment that you use. This means that you should pick whichever you like more. It is 100% a personal opinion and a personal choice. For myself, I prefer the Dex Faith version. The reason why I prefer it is because of the better choices when it comes to Ashes of War. I will never get over Waves of Gold. I really think that it's extremely good for PvE. And besides, I already have a Strength Faith build that is a complete tank and my favorite build, so it is nice to get some variety. You will need to make this decision on your own. When I started making this build, I did not expect how good it was going to be. I was honestly surprised, and this is a good thing. I found a very versatile build that allows you to deal a lot of damage and save resources by providing serious HP recovery. Not only that, but it can be used as a Dex Faith variant or a Strength Faith variant, meaning that it can fit the preferences of many players. Personally, I prefer Strength Faith and tank type characters, but I have to admit that this build has convinced me very quickly. It is probably my second favorite build that I have ever made. My dear viewer, I fully recommend this build to you. It is good and it can be adapted to your tastes. It is fun and it is strong. You cannot go wrong with it. I hope that it can give you as much value as it has given me. This is definitely one that you should always keep in your back pocket. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope I get to see you on the next one.